This CBS News special report is part of our continuing coverage of the crisis in the Kremlin. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
And updating you on the complicated and confusing situation inside the Soviet Union, specifically in Moscow at the moment. Keeping in mind that Boris Yeltsin is the president of the Russian Republic, Yeltsin reports that about 100 tanks seem to be moving toward the Russian Parliament building. Now, that's where tens of thousands of citizens loyal to Boris Yeltsin and opposed to the coup group that took over the Soviet government, ousting Mikhail Gorbachev, a group that Yeltsin now calls the junta, says it's outright a military junta. The Russian Foreign Affairs Minister says democratic reformers may form a government in exile if leaders of the coup remain in power. President Bush is heading back to his vacation headquarters in Kennebunkport, Maine, but this is after sending to Moscow the new U.S. ambassador to Moscow, Robert Strauss. However, Strauss will not be presenting his credentials to the coup government. Strauss will be on a fact-finding mission of about 8 days. Now, on the telephone line, live from Moscow now, we have Artem Borovik, who is a freelance Soviet journalist whom we've known over the years. Borovik is currently working for 60 Minutes. He and Mike Wallace and the 60 Minutes executive producer Don Hewitt are putting together a special program for 60 Minutes this coming Sunday. However, Borovik is on the phone with us now to tell us what the situation is like inside the Russian Federated Republic Parliament, the headquarters of Boris Yeltsin. Our team, thanks for being with us. What is the situation there at the moment? There's been some talk of perhaps even mining the Yeltsin headquarters as a defensive measure. Is that true?
Yes, the problem is that the White House, the way we call the headquarters of Mr. Yeltsin here in the center of Moscow, is connected with the Moscow underground system, with the Moscow metro. And there is a station metro inside the building. So Yeltsin decided to make the minefields in the ground floor of his headquarters in order to prevent the blue berets, or the, as we call them, the Spetsnaz units, to get inside the building through this channel. So we are now mined, and nobody is allowed to go into the ground floor. The latest news is that the top military general in Moscow, General Kalinin, imposed a curfew just some time ago, and nobody's allowed to go into the streets after 23:00, after 11 o'clock. According to the latest information that I have, Nazarbayev, the president of Kazakhstan, had a chat with the vice president of the Soviet Union, Yanayev, and Yanayev said that they won't open fire before 12 o'clock tonight. So this is the situation. I can see, as a matter of fact, American embassy from my window here in the White House, and I see a crowd of about 22 people standing inside the embassy and watching at us what's going to happen.
Artem, if you'll stand by for just one moment, we want to show our viewers again the map so they can orient themselves in Moscow. The Kremlin, of course, is the center, the historic center of the Soviet Union. Not far from the Kremlin is the Russian Parliament, which they now call offhandedly the White House, as you heard our friend Artem Borovik say a few moments ago. That's where Yeltsin is. That's where they've mined the first floor of the Parliament building. Now, Artem, let me ask you, are there armed people inside the building also standing by to defend it for what Yeltsin expects to be a possible assault?
Well, first of all, yes. I want to say that the Russian government, headed by Silayev, has left the White House. And so the main figures are Yeltsin and Vice President Rutskoy right now. They will organize and command the defense of the White House. There are about 50 armed people from a private agency, armed agency called Alex. The head of this agency told his men that they are volunteers, and if some of them are frightened or scared, don't want to risk their lives, they can leave the White House. And about 10 people left, but most of them are staying. We were protected during the last 24 hours by 12 tanks from one of the tank regiments situated close to Moscow. Unfortunately, they left about 2.5 hours ago, so we have no tank shield around us. According to the latest news, the Akhtirskaya division is headed towards Moscow along Minsk Highway, which is the main strategic highway connecting Moscow with the western borders.
Now, have you or anyone there actually sighted the tanks representing the coup leadership, what you call the junta? Have you actually sighted those tanks?
The problem is that when you begin talking with the tank commander to explain them the position, our position of Yeltsin, and ask them whether they are going to shoot, they immediately say, "No, guys, we're not. We're with you." You give them a Russian flag, three-color flag. They put it on the tank, and you're given a possibility even to write a slogan on the tank saying, "Military junta get lost," or something like that. So it's a very funny situation and tragic at the same time. So the military command in Moscow is really afraid of having these units stationed at the same place for more than 50 minutes or 1 hour, because they are immediately shifting to the side of Yeltsin after these 40 or 50 minutes negotiations with the civilians, with reporters, with people who are defending the White House. So Mr. Yazov and Mr. Moiseev, the head of Chief of General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Soviet Union, they are changing these units every hour and a half.
I understand. Our team, are you armed at this moment?
Well, most of us are, and all the people's deputies, in American terms, that's senators and congressmen, are all armed with, most of them are armed with pistols of the system Makarov, and most of the guards are armed with Kalashnikov and modernized Kalashnikov named AKSU.
So you
According
have
to the latest information, Dan, the weakest place here in the White House is the roof. So now Yeltsin has given orders to protect the roof of the building because it is less protected.
So there are armed guards moving to the roof. You've
Yes,
mined the
because
main floor of the Parliament building. You have armed people inside. Besides the mining, you have armed people inside with automatic weapons. And did you say also armed with mortars?
Yes, besides, military trucks and civilian trucks are standing in front, 2 meters in front of all the entrances. There are about 24 entrances into the White House protecting the entrances. But the building is made of glass, you know, really a lot of glass. So it's, honestly speaking, it's not a serious problem for professional soldiers and officers to get inside.
Well,
We're now locking all the rooms, and Yeltsin has given an order to give all of us gas masks.
Now, is the metro itself, the subway itself mined? You mentioned the mining of the main floor of the Parliament building because you were fearful that the coup leaders might try to enter the Parliament building through the metro, through the subway. Is the subway itself mined defensively now?
Not the subway, Dan, but the ground floor of the White House, where Metro has one of the lines.
Now, what exactly provoked the drastic steps in defense of the Parliament?
Dan, would you be so kind to repeat the question, because there are a lot of the noise is rising
Surely.
in the streets. I can't hear you.
What exactly provoked these defensive measures? I mean, why mine the Parliament building and go to these defensive measures?
The very serious threat of attack of the units and divisions Tamanskaya, which is situated near Moscow. The problem is that, as a matter of fact, we have intercepted radio dialogues between captains of tank crews today in the morning, and according to those intercepted dialogues, we know that tanks were headed and had a mission to attack the White House. But they didn't know that we had radio systems here inside the White House and that we could intercept. And this really broke their plans.
Our team, we want to go outside for a moment. Our CBS News correspondent Bert Quint is outside with a view of the Parliament building, in which you're broadcasting with us from the inside of that Parliament building. But just before doing that, what do you know about the whereabouts of Mikhail Gorbachev and the state of Gorbachev? These reports that his health is extremely bad.
Well, according according to the information that Mr. Yeltsin has and his team has and the reporters inside the White House have, Mr. Gorbachev is still kept under arrest in his residence in Faros. It is on the shore of the Black Sea in Crimea, and all his advisors are arrested. I'm talking about Mr. Shakhnazarov and his aide on foreign affairs, Mr. Chernyaev, and also General Medvedev, who is the head of his personal security team, is also under arrest.
Now, I want to make sure I understand this, Artem, that it's Yeltsin's understanding that Gorbachev's principal and closest advisors have all been arrested?
During the attempt to get in touch with Mr. Gorbachev. The fact is that the commander of the forces in Crimea that is controlling Mr. Gorbachev's residence in Crimea has ordered to arrest anybody who tries to get in touch with Mr. Gorbachev. And Mr. Shakhnazarov and Mr. Chernyaev tried to get in touch with him today in the morning and were arrested. We know nothing about what's going on with them. We also know that the family of Mr. Shakhnazarov, his wife and his son, who is a very famous film director, also under arrest in Faros. Mr. Gorbachev has no airplane right now that can take him to Moscow, or a helicopter. He did have one. He had two 134, as we call it, Air Force One, the president's plane.
Right. Artem, there were reports earlier today that Gorbachev himself had been flown by the leaders of the coup to Moscow. I want to make sure I understand. You're saying that it's Yeltsin's understanding that Gorbachev has not been brought to or any place around Moscow, that he's still in effect under house arrest in the Crimea.
Then we heard these rumors, but unfortunately they were not proved.
Okay. Now, Artem, is Edward Shevardnadze, is he with Yeltsin in the Parliament building?
Yes, I have talked to Mr. Shevardnadze about 2 hours ago in the right near Mr. Yeltsin's office. He gave 3 interviews. He made a speech today during the demonstration, a very emotional, very nice speech. He was very well received by the public, by people demonstrating. Mr. Shevardnadze has made a statement about 15 minutes ago. It's being transmitted by Interfax news agency, where Mr. Shevardnadze says that the new leadership is illegal and that everybody should stay on the side of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. Looks like the White House is becoming the center and the headquarters of all Democrats. You can see everybody here. Unfortunately, I couldn't see Mr. Yakovlev, but one of the people deputies, Yuri Karyakin, got in touch with Yakovlev, who, according to Karyakin's information, is in his home, and he said that the next 20 hours will be crucial and most important in this
is important, Artem. I hate to interrupt, but Alexander Yakovlev, I think many in our audience know, is sometimes called the godfather of perestroika and glasnost.
Theoretician.
At one time, at least the #1 advisor to Gorbachev, Edward Shevardnadze, of course, until fairly recently was the foreign minister of the Soviet government. Shevardnadze is now in the Parliament building with Yeltsin. Alexander Yakovlev is at his home, not too far away, and Yakovlev says he thinks the next 20 hours may be decisive. Now, what about the mayor of Moscow, Mr. Popov? Where is he?
Well, Shevardnadze told me that practically Popov is under arrest in his office in Mossovет. Mossovет is the building of the mayor of Moscow, because all the tanks and the BTRs and the armored vehicles are around the Mossovет building. He is there. We have no possibility to get in touch with him because most of the telephone lines of the White House have been cut during this day.
Now, what about these reports, Artem? We hear that the Democratic-minded mayor of Leningrad, an ally of Yeltsin and Gorbachev under present circumstances, is still in charge in Leningrad, and that the coup leaders have not been able to exert control over Leningrad. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. Anatoly Sobchak, one of the leaders of Perestroika and of democracy in this country, made a very important move yesterday, preventive as we call it. He went to the commander of armed forces of Leningrad military district and told them that if they obey orders of illegal junta, they will be put on trial and will have to put to jail after a new Nuremberg process that will certainly take place after the crisis. After they're all thrown away from Kremlin.
Our team, let me pause and say, for those who may be joining us in progress, this is CBS News live coverage of events inside the Soviet Union, particularly what's happening in Moscow now, where Boris Yeltsin and others of his supporters, including Alexander Yakovlev, are under the impression that the decisive hours are upon them. And Yeltsin is operating with Edward Shevardnadze in the Parliament building itself, the main floor of which has been mined as a defensive measure. Very quickly, our team, you say Leningrad is still in the hands of the Democratic forces, the mayor there. What about other provincial cities around the country? What do you hear? Have the coup leaders been able to exert their control in the major other provincial cities?
For the last 2 hours, a division of tanks was moving towards Kiev. But 30 minutes ago, we received an information that this movement was stopped, and the division is now staying still on one of the roads in the direction to Kiev. The leader of Armenia said that they're not bothered who is in Kremlin, who is the top man in Kremlin today. The only problem is how Kremlin perceives the situation in Karabakh, one of the crisis regions in the south of the Soviet Union.
Our team, why does Alexander Yakovlev think that the next 20 hours will decide the fate of the nation and the democratic movement?
Because with every hour, Yeltsin becomes stronger, has more support. If yesterday in the morning only about 2,000 or 3,000 people supported him, were demonstrating and supporting him around the White House, today in the morning we had around 170,000 people around the White House, and right now, at this very moment when I talk to you, Dan, we have around 50,000 people around the White House. We have a possibility to get in touch with the outer world. Yesterday in the morning, we did not have such an opportunity because, as you know, all the Democratic radio stations have been banned, and all the Democratic newspapers have been banned, and they're being published with the help of Xerox machines, simply on pieces of paper.
So Yeltsin does or does not have access to any radio or television that could reach the citizens of Moscow or beyond?
Radio amateurs, they're amateurs who love radio and who they help. This is, you might laugh, but this is the only way Yeltsin can get in touch with the rest of the world and with other cities in the Soviet Union. There are radio transmitter, but amateur radio transmitters.
Well, our team, I want to go to our correspondent outside the building in the Parliament.
Okay.
But I want to keep this telephone line open. This is very important, that we keep this telephone line open to you, our team. And while we talk to Bert Quint, would it be possible for you to possibly get President Yeltsin or that failing perhaps Edward Shevardnadze to the telephone? If you could do that, they would have an opportunity to speak to the many millions of American people, and of course, through the facilities of CBS News, would be speaking worldwide, in effect.
Honestly, Dan, I think it's very little chance for that because he is extremely busy right now. He gave Shevardnadze only about 5 minutes for a conversation.
How about Shevardnadze himself? Could you possibly get him to this phone?
I'll need about 15 minutes to find him. I don't really know where he is at this very moment.
Well, let's keep this phone line open and do what you can. We do appreciate very much your helping us here.
Dan, I'll try to do my best. I understand the importance of this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Artem Borovic, who's going to keep this telephone line open to the Parliament building in Moscow. I emphasize again that Artem Borovic is a freelance journalist whom we've known well over the years. He's working with Mike Wallace on a special report for 60 Minutes this coming Sunday. Now let's go outside the Parliament building, live to our CBS News correspondent Bert Quint, who's been posted there today to watch events, including the massive gathering at one point of many thousands of Muscovites who rallied in front of the Parliament building. Bert Quint, are you there? What do you see and hear at the moment?
Oh, Dan, yes, there definitely is a siege mentality here outside of Parliament, but there's no sign of an imminent attack. People are nervous, and I think both sides are fanning the nervousness, are working it up. Radio from inside has warned people to beware of a gas attack. Now, the Soviets are very, very wary of that ever since April 89, when it's believed that gas was used to...
At the Parliament building, reports of tank movements. What are we to make of this?
Well, it's clear that the Russian Parliament, freely elected Parliament, has become the symbolic citadel of democracy's stand against this coup, and that's fitting because in the conception of democracy as it now prevails in part of the Soviet Union, it's parliamentary democracy, not just leadership, that matters. That is, it's the process of electing delegates to a parliament. So it's right in some ways that along with the fate of Yeltsin and Gorbachev, it should be this parliament. There's also something else kind of frighteningly symbolic here, that the metro underneath the subway, underneath this parliament building, I believe is called Barrikadnaya. That is the barricades metro. It's a legacy of the 1917 revolution where a battle was fought. And in a sense, it's symbolically correct because barricades are going up all across this country. The potential for violence is enormous. I mean, one can hardly imagine how much blood could be shed. The question, I mean, clearly, the people who control this coup could crush this citadel, this parliamentary citadel, this symbol of democracy, if they want to. They could crush it physically. Yeltsin, Borovic tells us, communicates with the nation now by shortwave radio, fax machines, and Xerox machines, whereas the coup controls television, radio, and a tank force of thousands of tanks. They have 4 tanks. The hope is that somehow these people lack the political will to go ahead.
Well, it is a question now of how ruthless they will become. Are they prepared to go all the way, to use the kind of ruthlessness which usually marks military coups, or frequently marks them?
I have to say I pray they lack that will, not only for the obvious reasons, but because I have so many friends in that parliament building, some of whose names Artem Borovic mentioned. What seems to be lacking in this coup leadership is a real leader. I mean, it includes people who are, in the fullest sense of the word, bureaucrats.
Well, who's behind them? What's the face behind the coup leadership that we saw all lined up there in their suits?
There may not be any one single person behind them, though I can't help wondering where General Gromov is. After all, he was the commander in Afghanistan. He made that symbolic march across the bridge as the last soldier out. He is the deputy minister of the interior, which means he actually controls the tanks and the forces of the Ministry of the Interior, which are the forces primarily being used in Moscow now. He's nowhere to be seen. He is, or at least he was, a popular, charismatic figure, a youngish man in his late 40s, Napoleonic in stature, admired by the Afghan veterans. But on the other hand, something dramatic emerging, that Mr. Yeltsin's vice president, Mr. Rutskoy, is himself an Afghan veteran, a colonel, I believe. He is the leader of a party called Communists for Democracy, and it now appears that he's taking charge of the defense of the Russian parliament. So we have Afghan veteran against Afghan veteran, bureaucrat against bureaucrat, a nation divided, a barricade across the heart of the nation.
And a very large nation armed with thousands of nuclear missiles, which, if it isn't out of control, is teetering on the brink of being out of control. Let's go quickly to Jonathan Sanders at our Moscow Bureau. Jonathan?
Dan, the Soviet Evening News program, the official voice of the Soviet government, Vremya, has just announced that Valentin Pavlov, the Prime Minister of the Soviet Union, one of the 8 men involved in this special emergency committee, is in the hospital. He has been taken ill. It is unclear exactly whether he will continue in his office. The way the announcement was read, you would think he would not be continuing his duties either as the Prime Minister or as a member of this special emergency committee that is taking power in the Soviet Union, Dan.
Well, we've learned when someone in the Soviet Union says a high official has, quote, taken ill, unquote, that we need to think about that a little. Is there any indication that what he has lost is not his health but his nerve?
Could very well be the case.
Для судеб России и страны час. for Russia at this time. It's 19th August
Tape
of
of Boris
this year.
Yeltsin, which is just coming into us. We'll do our best to do some translation here.
A group of political adventurers took supreme power in the country and engineered a plot which is tantamount to the high supreme government state crime in violation of the Constitution and other laws of the country, and they have placed themselves outside and above the law. The political changes underway over the last 5 years have been halted. In one night, they were able to destroy achievements made in freedom, the legitimate rights of the citizenry to have its voice, have its say, and the putschists, the people who have engineered the plot, have taken control of power. People do not have any opportunity to say their voice. The putschists, the engineers of the plot, are using demagoguery and are accusing other people's democratic forces and are attempting to halt the economic change and progress and to deprive the Soviet Union of prosperity and a better life for all. This is the state of affairs at this time. They are referring to unprecedented inflation, but people like Yazov, Mr. Yazov, are responsible for reducing the nation to poverty. And is it not Starodubtsev, who was head of the Farmers' Union, who was responsible for the perishing of the last year's crops? And in terms of their crimes, these people have put the country in the face of a broad-scale terror. They would call themselves saviors, but are attempting to repress free thinking by nighttime arrests and other measures. One can only have a feeling of scorn towards them. They would have the legitimate laws of the nation eliminated.
Well, unfortunately, the videotape went faulty there. This is CBS News Live coverage from New York of events inside the Soviet Union with Jonathan Sanders live in our Moscow bureau, Bert Quint with live reports just outside the Parliament building, and exclusive reports from Artem Borovek, who is actually inside the Parliament building where Boris Yeltsin made that videotape. Now, that videotape was designed by the embattled and besieged Boris Yeltsin to be played to the Soviet people. So far as we can determine, it has not been broadcast anywhere, with the possible exception of the special, what we would call ham radios, that is private radios. There's some possibility that at least the voice portion of it got out. But Yeltsin, although he is the duly elected, and we're now talking about a general election, elected overwhelmingly as President of the Soviet Republic, since the coup has been cut off for access to television and radio inside of the Soviet Union. I mentioned that Yeltsin was elected in a general election because Mikhail Gorbachev was elected president not in a broad national election, but at a party congress. Perhaps the details of that at another time, but it's an important difference to make that Gorbachev has not won any general election. Yeltsin has. Yeltsin is popular inside the Soviet Union, particularly inside the Russian Republic itself. Gorbachev, has been reported so many times, was unpopular throughout the country as a whole, very popular outside the Soviet Union, but inside the Soviet Union, his standing in recent months at least, not nearly that of Yeltsin's. Now that videotape, as I say, what we don't believe was seen or heard by the Soviet people. Certainly a sense, Steve Cohen, of a building climax of some sort. Now we have this report that one member of what Yeltsin calls the military junta, the coup, has gone to the hospital, quote, ill. I was about to ask before, is this likely to mean that he has lost his health or he's lost his nerve?
Well, he may have lost his nerve, but it suggests, at least to a certain degree, that this is a divided junta leadership, coup d'etat leadership. They represent 5 or 6 powerful elites, institutions, power exercising institutions in the Soviet Union.
You mean like KGB, the military-industrial complex, the military?
Party apparatus, the military itself. These are undemocratic institutions in the most profound sense, but they are institutions with a long history of conflicts among them. And therefore, what unity they have was to stop democracy and restore order as they understand it. It is possible that they lack a united will, and they certainly lack a real leader to carry through, in the most ruthless sense of the word, what they've begun. I mean, after all, Mr. Pavlov, who was the Prime Minister of the Soviet Union, a leading member of this coup d'etat, a man who tried to take power from Mr. Gorbachev about a month ago, 2 months ago, in Parliament, tried to take power then parliamentarily, so to speak. This man is a professional finance expert. What does he know about tanks?
Good question. Jonathan Sanders in our Moscow Bureau. Is there any sense there that the coup d'etat leadership is beginning to come unraveled?
Dan, I think that the unraveling of that leadership will focus in the speculation throughout Moscow and throughout the Soviet Union on what has happened to Mr. Pavlov. I think that Steve Cohn is exactly right. People have known since June 17th, when he tried to take power in the parliament, that he didn't like the way Gorbachev was doing things. But to be absolutely frank with you, Dan, Mr. Pavlov is inept and he is a mediocrity. He was a mediocre economic planner. He is the man who's brought inflation in some ways to the Soviet Union, solving Soviet financial problems when he was in charge of finance by simply printing more money. He's not a particularly innovative figure. And for that matter, I don't think any of the men who are on that now probably 7-man committee that have taken over in the Soviet Union have great leadership potential, though some of them, like Boris Pugo, the Minister of the Interior, are notoriously ruthless individuals. The man in charge of the group, Gennady Yanayev.
Please forgive me for interrupting you, Jonathan, but we just have Artem Borovik back on the telephone with us, live from inside the Parliament building. And Artem, if you're there, it's my understanding you've just spoken again with Boris Yeltsin himself? Artem, are you there? Well, he was at the phone a moment ago.
Yes.
Artem, are you there? It's Dan Rather, New York. Artem Borovik, are you there? Some confusion at that end of the line. We'll continue trying to get Artem Borovik up for you. It was our understanding that he'd gone to see if Edward Shevardnadze would come to the telephone and speak to us as part of our live CBS News coverage of what's happening inside the Soviet Union in Moscow now, with a newly declared curfew in Moscow, we believe, due to go into effect in just over an hour from now. Moscow time, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., a curfew having been declared. Boris Yeltsin having told the British Prime Minister John Major that he was fearful that tanks might be closing in on him, tanks under the command of the coup leadership. A fluid situation, to say the least, a dangerous situation, one complicated and very confusing, hard to tell what the facts are. But if we can get our man inside the Parliament building back on the phone very shortly, we'll be playing that for you. But in the meantime, Jonathan Sanders, let's pick up where you were. This word that we just got from Alexander Yakovlev, that perhaps the next 20 hours or so will be the decisive moments. You had said earlier that, well, in effect, that may be as Yakovlev sees it, but it's hard to get a sense of that in Moscow as a whole.
That's correct, Dan. Outside of the area immediately around the Russian Parliament building, there's this eerie sense of calm. In fact, Dan, I have to say that some of the things we saw this morning were virtually surreal. Soviets walking with their children, going up, looking and talking to the soldiers sitting on the armored personnel carriers, tourists trying to pose with the tanks and trying to get St. Basil's and the tanks in the same shot. Ordinary Soviets are trying very hard to talk to the soldiers. I think Artyom Borovik was extremely eloquent in explaining why the tank commanders won't let the tanks sit in one place for more than 50 minutes or so, because when they sit in one place, they talk to the people, they talk to the politicians, and then they begin thinking about what they're doing and going over to the other side. But there's a sense in Moscow, if you listen to the radio, Echo Moscow radio, Russian radio that there is a crisis, that things are coming to a head at the Russian parliament. But I must say, having been through some of this at the Lithuanian parliament a couple times in the past 16 or 18 months, there is a cycle of hysteria that mounts. Sometimes that hysteria is justified, sometimes it just feeds on itself, and frankly, we can't tell what the reality is from here.
Again, we're going to try to go back inside the Russian parliament building in Moscow, not far from the Kremlin, and try to raise Artem Borovik. Are you there, Artem?
Yes, I am.
Thank you for coming back on the line. It was my understanding that you perhaps talked to Boris Yeltsin himself while you were away. Is that true?
Yes, I have got in touch with Mr. Yeltsin's office and talked to his people just a few minutes ago. Unfortunately, he cannot make the statement personally in front of those people who watch CBS right now because he's extremely busy. Very important decisions are being made right at this moment. But he wanted me to make this statement, his statement, in front of those people
This is
who
from
watch
Boris
CBS.
Yeltsin himself.
Yes, this is his statement issued, made just 7 or 10 minutes ago. According to the statement of Mr. Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Federation, people, officers of the Ministry of Defense of the Soviet Union, Ministry of Home Affairs of the Soviet Union, KGB of the Soviet Union, involved into anti-constitutional activities of the illegal junta will not be put on trial, will not be punished will not be punished for obeying orders of their commanders, illegal orders, if right this minute they start obeying orders of the President of the Russian Federation and orders of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. This is the statement that Mr. Yeltsin wanted me to read out loud in front of the CBS people who watch CBS right
Tim,
now.
in case we lose this contact, it would be very important for us perhaps to you to relay to Boris Yeltsin that we played here as part of our CBS News live coverage the videotape which he made earlier, which Boris Yeltsin made earlier, the videotape he made earlier, intending it to be broadcast to the Soviet people, that we played that videotape, a portion of it, on this broadcast. I want to ask you, Tim, also that Yeltsin is quoted as saying that some elite troops have said that they are willing to defend the parliament and that the 2 units of these elite troops add up to a total of as many as 20,000 soldiers. Can that be true?
The noise is very strong, unfortunately, in the street. Would you be so kind to repeat the question?
Certainly. Boris Yeltsin is quoted in one wire service report as saying that some elite Russian soldiers, Soviet troops, have said that they're willing to defend his parliament building headquarters and that the 2 units include up to 20,000 Soviet soldiers prepared to help Yeltsin. Can that be true?
No, unfortunately, I cannot confirm that. I have counted about 15 tanks, maximum 17 tanks around the White House. This is the way we call the residence of Mr. Yeltsin. And unfortunately, we don't see any more support during the last 2 hours. As I have said previously to Dan Rather, the units that were guarding the White House for the last 20 hours unfortunately left the White House. According to last information given to me by the office of Mr. Yeltsin, Mr. Pavlov, who is the member of the military junta, has now a very strong heart disease and cannot act as the Prime Minister of the Soviet Union, and his first deputy, Doguzhiev, is now acting as Prime Minister of the Soviet Union. Now, there are different speculations and rumors about what is really going on. There is a rumor according to which Mr. Pavlov decided not to participate in the activities of the illegal junta, and this is why Mr. Doguzhiev was appointed as the acting Prime Minister of the Soviet Union. The latest news also, a column of tanks has entered Tallinn, and the column of tanks has also entered Vilnius. The column of tanks is standing right near Kiev, and as soon as I know something else about the situation in Kiev, I will get in touch with you immediately.
All right. Artem, any opportunity for Edward Shevardnadze to come to the telephone?
This is easier. Unfortunately, Mr. Yeltsin apologizes. He cannot answer your questions this very moment. You can understand why. I'm much more hopeful about Mr. Shevardnadze.
Well, do what you can there, Artem.
I'll try to.
Thank you very much, Artem Borovek, who's been working with Mike Wallace on a special report for 60 Minutes on Sunday, helping us today with live reports from inside the Russian Parliament building, which he says the main floor of which has been mined, and that various people have armed themselves with automatic weapons and even mortars inside the Russian Parliament building. One of the things they were concerned about was being infiltrated by coup forces through the subway, through the Russian metro, which runs right under that Russian Parliament building, and that was one reason for mining the first floor and at least near the entrance to that metro building. There is a fear. One could not move it to the level of expectation, I don't think, Steve Cohen, on Boris Yeltsin's part, that the curfew being announced in Moscow for tonight, 11 to 5, Moscow time over the night, might be designed to clear the way for some attack. However, we have one Russian parliament official, Vladimir Lukin, who says that Boris Yeltsin has spoken by telephone with the acting Soviet president, Gennady Yanayev, who took over from Gorbachev, and that, according to this report, Yanayev has given, quote, his word of honor that the Russian parliament building will not be stormed tonight.
Men who come like thieves in the night on tanks have no honor in such affairs. I don't think you can count on that. We've got to be reminded from this remarkable interview you had with Artem Borovik of how unequal a struggle it is. He is trying to communicate to his own people, Yeltsin is, through CBS to a certain extent, reading his statement through Borovik to you. He doesn't have direct communication with the Russian people themselves. The shortwave radio is now a major player in this struggle. Almost every Soviet citizen, even in the countryside, has a shortwave radio. It's a legacy of the pre-Glasnost days when censorship left nothing of real import on the Soviet radio and Soviet television. So people acquired shortwave radios, which can be easily bought in shops, to listen to foreign language, Russian language broadcasts from abroad. Many of them almost around the clock. And now once again they're listening to him, and Yeltsin is trying to communicate to his people through foreign broadcast via the shortwave radio.
Forgive me interrupting, Steve. This is the way it goes sometimes with live news coverage. Artem Borovik is back with new information on the telephone from inside the Parliament building. Artem, if you are there, please come up. I understand you have some new information for us.
Dan, I will say what the latest news that came to me from the office of Boris Yeltsin. Unfortunately, I cannot hear your questions. The latest news, Mr. Yazov, the Minister of Defense, has resigned a few minutes ago. The official explanation is illness. Mr. Pavlov, the Prime Minister, has resigned. Official explanation, heart disease. Mr. Khrushchev, head of the KGB, has resigned. No official explanation.
Well, Artem Borovik, I have to ask you, suddenly a lot of people are getting ill. Gorbachev is ill. Now the defense minister is ill. One member of the coup is ill. And the head of the KGB is ill. I want to double check that. While is this all a coincidence that these people are getting ill at the same time? That's one question. The other, please, is are you certain of these reports?
Yes, this is the report that came to me 2 minutes ago from Mr. Yeltsin's office. This is what we know right now, this very moment, in the White House. And this is we can say that this is the official statement of the office of Mr. Yeltsin.
Jim, if I may, we have one report that Boris Yeltsin has spoken with Gennady Yanayev today, and that Yanayev has assured Yeltsin that the Russian Parliament building will not be stormed this night. Do you know whether that wire service story is correct?
It is. The essence is correct.
I fear we lost our phone connection, but the last words from Artem Borovik we'll try to reestablish the phone call, was that the essence of that report is correct, Steve Cohen, that at least Boris Yeltsin has been in touch with the vice president who became president when Gorbachev was deposed, Gennady Yanayev.
Dan, there may be something even bigger here in what our Tim Borvik has told us from inside the Russian parliament building. I say if his report is correct. He is reporting that Mr. Khrushchev, head of the KGB, Mr. Yazov, head of the army, and Mr. Pavlov, head of the state economic ministries, have all become ill. In other words, they've quit or been replaced from the coup leadership. These are the three main institutions that had the muscle, the control of the economy, the control of the army, the control of the secret police. These are the institutions that provided for the muscle for this coup. Their leaders were the people who were the architects of this coup. If they have now stepped down, either the coup has come into other hands or the coup is falling apart, if this report is true.
For precision, on close questioning, Borvik said that they had resigned, at least two of them had resigned. It was my understanding, he said, the head of the KGB and the head of the military had resigned. First he said, well, they said they were ill. Then he said, well, they've resigned. Then he says that the one had heart trouble. But look, what appears to be either there's something in the water where this coup leadership is, or there are signs that at the top there are fissures, if not indeed fairly wide cracks developing.
Let's not lose sight of the fact, though, that this report, more than a rumor but not yet a confirmed fact, has to do with the three central figures who plotted and carried out this coup. Reports that they have resigned or are sick.
Jonathan Sanders in our Moscow bureau. You've been listening here, I hope, to what we've heard from Boris Yeltsin and his staff from inside the Russian parliament building.
Dan, I can give you confirmation on 2 of the 3